Hey everyone, William here. This is the 8th development update video for Manifold Garden. In today's video, I'm going to be going over the state of the tech systems, what's been added in the last few months, and what I'm currently working on. In terms of the tech, the game is pretty much there. These are all the systems that are in place. Gameplay mechanics, saving and loading games, dynamic loading of levels at runtime, basically streaming in neighbor levels while you play so that there are no load scenes, UI, and localization, which was a huge pain to do. There's of course still optimization to be done and bugs to fix, as well as the PlayStation 4 version. All in all though, the tech is in a pretty solid state. Now, as far as visuals go, we've added several new elements. So the first is that we've added bloom. This is one that's had the biggest impact on the visuals so far. Up until now, all of the lighting in each level has come from a single directional light. So when you have light shining through a window, it looks fantastic. However, if you've got kind of like a long stretch of indoor area, it can be kind of monotonous. The ambience feels the same throughout this whole thing. So having some bloom here really makes it look a lot more interesting visually. This also gives us the added bonus of being able to direct player attention to certain areas. You know, if something is really bright on the screen, we can draw the player's attention there. So that's going to be very useful for level design as well. I've also started to make different types of doors. This is primarily to provide more visual variety to the game, but it also helps players orient themselves in a level. So far, we've just had one type of door in the entire game, whether it's taking you to another room or to another level. By having different doors to different areas, it'll help players understand, okay, this is where they want to go, you know, this is an area they can come back to later, this is more important, etc., etc. Finally, we've also added these divine plant life objects. I'm not going to talk too much about them at the moment, but I do really love the way they look. And finally, just lots of polish for existing assets, adding animation, improving the overall visual design, that kind of stuff. The last topic I want to talk about is some of the design problems that I am currently fixing. So I've known about these issues for a while, but it wasn't until recently with the tech more or less in place that I've been able to finally take the time to fix them. I know it probably seems kind of weird that I'm, fixing critical design issues this late in development, but a lot of these problems needed the visuals and tech to be at a certain level before they could be addressed. It's kind of like rearranging furniture at a restaurant. It's important, but first we have to build everything else. So here are the three biggest issues that I've heard from playtesters over the years. A lot of common feedback end up being variations of these statements. So one, there's no story, no impetus to advance, no direction, and no objective. Two, it's just a game about picking up and dropping boxes. Three, the architecture is interesting, but you don't do anything interesting in the space. So these last few weeks, I finally started to tackle these problems, and let's go over them in order now, and I'll talk about, what my solution or planned solution is. So for the first problem, there's no story, there's no impetus to advance, no direction, and no objective. The thing with player feedback, it's important to understand the root of the problem and not the symptom. And I think in this case, the solution isn't necessarily to add an explicit story, like, your character is in a coma or something. In fact, the game does already have a narrative. You do have a purpose in the world. It is fairly abstract, but there is an interpretation for it. And I think the key problem here is that the player is not getting a sense of their purpose early enough. Manifold Garden doesn't have a quest list to tell you what you need to do or quest markers to tell you where you need to go. That's all fine, but it does mean that the game has to work extra hard to let players know what their goals are, especially since those are conventions in a lot of games nowadays. I think goals in games can be divided into roughly three parts, or three categories: short-term, medium-term, and long-term. In an action game, your short-term goal is, probably just defeat the group of enemies you're currently fighting. The medium-term goal is to, maybe power up enough that you can get the next upgrade. And the long-term goal is defeat the evil boss and save the world, as an example. In Manifold Garden, the short-term goal is to solve a puzzle. You're in a room, the door is locked. In order to unlock it, you have to solve the puzzle. And your immediate goal is to just get out. Okay, so that's your short-term goal, solve the puzzle and get out of this room. Your medium-term goal is probably to finish the level. You know, there's a door to the next area, and in order to unlock it, you need to solve 4 puzzles. So, you know, you solve these puzzles and then you've beaten this area, you've completed it. And as for the long-term goal, well, that's what players are missing at the moment. They don't have a clear idea of what all of this is working towards. And what I found is that, like, you know, if you design the game well with you can use the short-term goals and medium-term goals to kind of like string players along for an hour or two, but then after that, players are like, okay, you know, what's all this for? Why am I playing this? And it's not that there isn't a long-term goal in the game, there is, but right now it's not communicated very clearly. So in Manifold Garden, you are a cosmic gardener on a mystic journey to bring life to the universe. You are on a mission to prepare the world for the next stage of its evolution. And there's all this cool stuff that happens. So you do have a purpose, you are on a mission. But the problem is right now you have to play for about like 2 or 3 hours before this starts to become clear. And a lot of this has to do with the organic way the design of the game has evolved. You know, a lot of these mechanics that became your purpose were originally intended as like a bonus thing, so they were kind of tucked away. So one example is this dark world, which is a really major part of the game. But originally this dark world was meant as a reward if you kind of solve puzzles in a different way than it was originally intended. What I've done in the latest version is that I've made the dark world much more prominent. Now, instead of taking 2 or 3 hours to discover it, the players are expected to come across in the first hour. And, you know, there's still a lot to do from there and a lot that needs to be uncovered, but at least it starts hinting at a bigger purpose and a sense of mystery to the world. Okay, now problem number 2. It's just a game about picking up and dropping boxes. Ultimately, I don't think it's possible to get away from the boxes. They are a part of the grammar of the puzzle language in the game. And the reason why I need them is that because you can change gravity and the world wraps around, there are no constraints in terms of movement. And without constraints, you can't really have puzzles. But when you're carrying a cube, you can't change gravity, because when you do, the cube freezes and it can no longer be held. So that means, like, you know, if I need to carry a blue box from point A to point B, you know, I have to think about how I can do that without, like, while staying in blue, or getting it somewhere where I can then change gravity back and finish the puzzle. So it's you know, it's what makes the puzzles interesting. Now, of course, they don't have to be cubes. Like, they could be bags of money or something, but the game is fairly abstract and minimalist, so cubes make the most sense. That being said, I think this is another case where I need to look at the root of the problem and not the symptom. I think the problem here is not so much about the cubes itself, but the kinds of interaction that you have with them. You might already know that you can use cubes in Manifold Garden to redirect water and grow trees. The problem with puzzles that involve water redirection is that in order to gate the player and test their knowledge, I require the player to, like, bring multiple cubes in order to open the door. I think the solution for this is to make the redirection of the water itself open the door. So here I've introduced a water wheel. Basically, you can direct water through the center of the wheel and it turns on the water wheel, which in turn powers on the door. So this is still a puzzle that requires a player to understand water redirection, but this means once you've redirected the water, the puzzle is already solved. You don't have to, you know, go back and forth carrying a bunch of cubes. Here's another mechanic that makes interaction more interesting. So this is an object that can transition between being solid and non-solid. Okay, problem number 3. The architecture is interesting, but you don't do anything interesting in the space. For this issue, I actually have several solutions implemented already, but they're in the later parts of the game. So I think the key here is to just move them a lot closer to the beginning so that players get a taste of them earlier on. So here is an example of a puzzle that utilizes all the mechanics. This is just the testing error, so the geometry looks quite simple. We know in Manifold Garden, in addition to changing gravity, the world wraps around in all 3 axes. Here's a puzzle that uses both the water wheel and solid state objects. Now in this puzzle, what we want to do is we want to get a blue cube across this gap. And the water wheel here powers on the solid state object. So when water is going through this wheel, this piece of geometry is solid. However, when the object is solid, it actually cuts off the water to the water wheel, which in turn make the object non-solid. So it's basically stuck in this loop. And this means that there's not enough time for us to cross the bridge because the bridge is only solid for so long. Now what you have to do is utilize the wool wrapping. Right? Instead of bending the water towards the water wheel like this, you can actually bend it in the other direction. And because the wool wraps along this axis, the water enters the water wheel from the other side and it bypassing the solid state object. So anyway, that's it for this update. If you like this video, feel free to subscribe to the channel. Let me know if you have any questions or feedback in the comments, and you can add the game to your wish list on Steam. And as always, you can find me on Twitter and Twitch. Okay, until next time.